In the early dawn light, a lone figure stood atop a hill, his heart racing as his gaze fell upon an endless sea of warriors. Before him stretched a vast army, 8,000 Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho braves, each of them a formidable force, armed and ready for battle. Their weapons gleamed in the morning sun, and the wind carried the echo of drums as they gathered for what would be one of the largest intertribal conflicts ever seen on the plain. The man, a seasoned warrior of the Crow people, was the first to spot the vast alliance of their enemies. As his pulse quickened and dread filled his heart, he knew that the destruction of his people was imminent. But, like any true warrior, his first instinct was to act, not succumb to fear. His horse galloped beneath him as he raced back to the Crow camp, his mind consumed by the urgency of the warning he must deliver. The sounds of galloping hooves carried across the vast plains, reverberating through the valley, creating an eerie silence as the impending clash of armies loomed closer. The warriors, eager for the challenge ahead, waited for his report. As the lone rider entered the camp, breathless from his urgent ride, he delivered the news. The Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, 8,000 strong, are coming. They march to destroy us. We must prepare. His warning sparked immediate action. In moments, 10 of the most seasoned warriors, knowing full well they were walking to certain death, volunteered to confront the approaching army head-on. These brave men were no strangers to the harsh realities of war, having fought many battles with skill and ferocity. Their mission was clear: to delay the enemy long enough to allow the rest of the Crow people to fortify their defenses. Behind them, the camp became a beehive of activity. Women worked furiously to dismantle tepees and prepare supplies. Warriors erected barricades and set up strategic positions. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke, as fires were lit to cook meals, while the steady rhythm of pounding drums reverberated through the camp. Every man, woman, and child understood the gravity of the situation, and their determination to survive was etched on their faces. For the Crow people, this was not just another raid. It was a battle for survival. The Sioux, driven by a relentless thirst for vengeance, had united with the Cheyenne and Arapaho in a massive alliance, bringing together forces that far outnumbered the Crow's defenders. What began as a conflict over territory had escalated into a fight for survival. The Sioux had lost much to the Crow in the past, and their thirst for vengeance was fueled by years of raids and deadly encounters. The Crow had always been cunning and resourceful, and the Sioux knew that if they were to secure their future in the West, they must eliminate the Crow once and for all. As the battle loomed closer, the heart of the Crow people swelled with both fear and determination. They knew that the coming conflict would test every ounce of their strength, cunning, and bravery. The winds of fate seemed to blow in a direction no one could predict. The events that led to the Battle of Pryor Creek began long before the battle itself, in a time of great grief and vengeance. The catalyst for the war had been a mother's heartbreak, a wound so deep that it could only be soothed through bloodshed and retribution. The Sioux had long held grudges against the Crow for their daring raids, but it was the death of a young Sioux warrior that ignited the fury of the entire Sioux nation. In the summer of 1859, a Crow war party had killed a promising young Dakota Sioux warrior. The young man had earned the prestigious honor of wearing an eagle-feathered war bonnet, a symbol of his prowess in battle. His death shattered the hearts of his family, especially his mother, who had already lost so much. For a year, she mourned, walking through the camp each evening with her son's horse, tied to an empty saddle. As she passed each teepee, her challenge rang out, echoing across the camp. "Is there no man among the mighty warriors who will take this horse and avenge my son?" Her words became a haunting refrain, and her grief soon became a rallying cry for vengeance. It was during one of her nightly walks that a warrior, known as Brave Wolf, stepped forward. Brave Wolf was a man who had known his own heartache. Rejected by his family for his choice of bride, he sought honor and a way to end his own personal pain. When he heard the mother's words, something stirred in him, an overwhelming desire to find meaning through sacrifice. He stepped forward, grasped the reins of the horse, and declared that he would take up the challenge. The moment was a turning point. Brave Wolf's decision to join the warrior society, known for its suicidal oath, fighting to the death for their people, marked the beginning of a conflict that would change the course of history. Brave Wolf's actions signified a new chapter in the story of the Sioux and the Crow, one that would ultimately lead to the largest intertribal war on the northern plains. As the Council of Dakota leaders convened to discuss the implications of Brave Wolf's actions, the weight of the decision was clear. Rising Star, the eldest war chief, recognized that this was no ordinary battle. This was a fight that would determine the future of their people. He declared that it was time not only to raid the Crow, but to eradicate them from the land entirely. The seeds of the conflict had been sown, and by the time winter arrived, the Sioux had united their forces with the Cheyenne and Arapaho. Emissaries traveled across the plains, convincing other tribes to join the campaign, painting a picture of the glory and riches that would come with the Crow's destruction. The combined forces of the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho gathered at the confluence of Big Goose Creek and Little Goose Creek, and their ranks swelled as they prepared to march toward the Crow's stronghold. In the midst of this mounting tension, an unexpected voice rose from the council. Nithors, the respected Arapaho chief, stood before the gathering, and in a moment that would change the course of the battle, he revealed his heritage. "I am Crow by birth," he declared. "The blood you seek to spill is the blood of my relatives." His words caused a stir among the assembled warriors, for Nithors was a man of great reputation. His loyalty to the Sioux was unquestioned, but his heritage as a Crow caused a rift in the council. Would this division alter the course of the impending battle? Only time would tell, but Nithos' plea for caution would echo in the minds of the warriors as they prepared for the battle that was about to unfold. As winter faded into spring, the alliance of Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors grew stronger by the day. With each passing sunrise, the tension in the air thickened. The vast plains stretched endlessly before them, a canvas for an inevitable bloodshed. Each warrior, draped in his tribe's war colors, could feel the weight of the impending clash, the dread of a conflict that would decide the fate of many. Brave Wolf, who had been at the forefront of the Sioux's call for war, sharpened his spear in silence. He could see it in the eyes of his fellow warriors. This was no ordinary battle. The Crow had been known for their fierce resistance and cunning tactics. They would not fall easily. Brave Wolf knew the challenge ahead would be grueling. His resolve, however, remained firm. This was his chance to prove himself, to earn the honor and glory his people had longed for. In the Crow camp, the mood was one of grim determination. The warning had been delivered, and the Crow warriors understood the gravity of the situation. Their enemies vastly outnumbered them, but they were not unprepared. Chief Blackhawk, a leader respected for his wisdom and courage, stood atop a raised platform and addressed his people. "Our ancestors have walked these lands for centuries. It is our duty to protect them, to protect our way of life. We will stand and fight for our homes, our families, and our future." The warriors shouted in unison, their voices rising like the wind in the hills. The women and children, though fearful, rallied around their men. The entire camp had already begun to prepare, every hand working tirelessly. Shields were made, arrows were fletched, and spears were honed to deadly sharp. It was an all-consuming task, and every Crow, from the youngest child to the eldest elder, knew they had to give their all if they were to survive this onslaught. Among the warriors, many knew this battle would be their last. It was not lost on them that, despite their courage and skill, they were outnumbered. Yet, they had one advantage: intimate knowledge of the land. The vast plains, with their rolling hills and hidden ravines, would be their allies. They would use the terrain to their advantage, slipping like shadows through the grass and making the most of every opportunity to strike. As the sun sank below the horizon on the eve of battle, the air was filled with the sounds of war songs and prayers. In the sacred space of the camp, the warriors gathered for one final ceremony, offering prayers to the spirits and seeking guidance from their ancestors. They asked for strength, for courage, and for victory. It was a time of deep reflection, as each warrior prepared for the bloodshed to come. Brave Wolf, standing at the edge of the camp, could feel the weight of the spirits watching over them. The cries of the grieving mother echoed in his mind, and he knew that vengeance would be the fuel that drove him into battle. Yet there was something else, a deep-rooted sense of duty to his people, to his ancestors, and to the land they called home. The storm was gathering, and the crow would stand firm. The coming dawn would bring with it a fight for survival, a fight that would shape the fate of the plains forever. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the plains, casting long shadows over the land. The Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors advanced slowly, their war cries filling the air like the rumbling of thunder. The earth trembled beneath their feet as they made their way toward the Crow stronghold. In the distance, the Crow warriors stood waiting, their figures silhouetted against the rising sun. The time for talk had ended. The time for battle had come. Chief Blackhawk's voice rang out over the camp, a command that sent a ripple through the warriors. "Hold the line. We fight for our land, for our future." With that, the battle began. The first clash was like a storm breaking loose. Arrows whistled through the air, and the sound of battle drums reverberated across the plains. The Crow warriors, who knew every stone and tree, fought with ferocity and skill. They used the terrain to their advantage, striking swiftly from hidden positions and retreating into the cover of tall grasses and ravines. They knew how to use the land like an extension of their own bodies, drawing on the ancient knowledge passed down through generations. But the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho were relentless. Their numbers overwhelmed the defenders, pushing them back with sheer force. The combined might of the three tribes was like an unstoppable tide, crashing against the Crow defenses. Brave Wolf led a charge against the Crow's left flank, his spear flashing as he drove it into the heart of his enemies. His war cry echoed across the battlefield, a sound of vengeance and bloodlust. Despite their courage, the Crow were being pushed back, their warriors falling one by one. The strength of the enemy's numbers proved to be too much. Yet, the Crow refused to surrender. Their warriors fought until their weapons broke, until their strength gave way, but they never turned their backs to the enemy. The battle had become a desperate struggle for survival. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the plains were filled with the chaos of battle. Bodies lay scattered across the field. The scent of blood thickened the air. Brave Wolf, now covered in the blood of his enemies and his own, fought on, his spear never wavering. He was determined to see the battle through to its bitter end, to fulfill the vow he had made to the grieving mother, and to prove his worth as a warrior. For the Crow, the battle raged on with a fury that seemed to defy reason. Every moment, they fought with everything they had, even as their numbers dwindled. It was a battle they could not afford to lose, for the price of defeat was the destruction of their way of life. Yet, as the day wore on, it became clear that the tide was turning against them. The Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho had gained the upper hand, and the Crow were being forced to retreat. The battle would not be won by sheer strength alone. It would be won by strategy, by cunning, and by the will to survive. And as the blood of warriors soaked into the earth, the Crow knew that their fight was far from over. The storm had broken, but the struggle for survival would continue. As the sun began to dip beneath the horizon, casting the sky in hues of crimson and gold, the battle raged on with no sign of slowing. The once proud Crow warriors were pushed further and further back, their lines breaking as the combined forces of the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho pressed them relentlessly. Yet, in the chaos of war, a spark of hope remained. Amidst the turmoil, a small group of Crow warriors, led by Chief Blackhawk, found themselves in a precarious position, cornered near a steep ravine. With blood streaming from their wounds, the Crow warriors gathered their remaining strength for a final stand. Blackhawk's eyes glinted with defiance as he turned to his warriors, rallying them for one last charge. "We are not just fighting for ourselves, but for the generations yet to come." His voice was steady, unwavering, despite the odds. "We fight for the land, for our spirit, for our ancestors." The Crow, though outnumbered, had a fierce resolve that was matched only by the desperation in their hearts. They formed a small, but tight, line, determined to make one last effort to defend their homeland. The Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, sensing their advantage, charged forward, but they were met with a sudden and unexpected force. Blackhawk and his warriors surged from their hiding places in the ravine, leaping from the shadows and striking with precision. The battle turned for a moment as the Crow warriors, using the element of surprise, took down several of their enemies, sending shockwaves through the ranks of the Allied forces. For a brief moment, it felt as though the tide had shifted. The sound of battle grew louder as the Crow fought back with everything they had left. Brave Wolf, who had been relentless in his pursuit, found himself in the midst of the chaos, struggling to maintain control of his emotion. His spear was drenched in blood, but his heart burned with an unyielding desire to protect his people. Yet, in that fleeting moment of hope, the true cost of war became clear to him. The line between victory and defeat was razor-thin, and the price of their courage would soon be paid in blood. The sound of war, cries, filled the air as the tide of battle began to change once again. The Allies' forces, though staggered by the Crow's resistance, were reinforced by more warriors, and their numbers once again overwhelmed the defenders. Blackhawk and his warriors fought valiantly, but the battle had taken a toll on them. They could not hold the line for much longer. As the sun finally set, the battlefield was littered with the fallen from both sides, and the survivors of the Crow warriors were pushed into retreat. The victory that seemed so close was slipping away, and for many, the harsh reality of their situation became all too clear. The Crow had fought bravely, but the numbers and strength of their enemies were too much to overcome. The struggle for survival had come at a devastating cost. The morning after the battle was eerily silent. The plains, once filled with the sounds of war, now stood quiet, save for the mournful cries of the wounded. The sky, still tinged with the fading light of the previous evening's conflict, seemed to mourn the lives lost in the struggle. The Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes gathered together in solemn silence, their triumph tainted by the realization of the immense toll the battle had taken. Brave Wolf, bloodied and exhausted, stood at the edge of the battlefield, his spear now a lifeless weight in his hand. He could see the fallen, his brothers in arms from both sides, scattered across the field. His heart ached with the weight of their loss. Yet, in the midst of the destruction, he could not shake the feeling that the war was far from over. The Crow had proven to be a formidable enemy, and despite the victory, their fight for survival would continue. In the distance, Chief Blackhawk and the remaining Crow warriors regrouped. The battle had not broken their spirit, but it had left them weakened. They had lost many good men, but they had not lost their will to fight. The retreat was a painful but necessary decision, one that allowed them to live and fight another day. The Crow would regroup, rebuild, and one day they would return to reclaim their land. The Sioux and their allies, though victorious, were not without their own losses. Battle had been hard fought, and their warriors, too, bore the scars of combat. The victory had come at a high price, and the reality of the cost of war weighed heavily on their hearts. There was no celebration, no rejoicing in the aftermath, only a deep sense of reflection, as each tribe mourned its losses and prepared for the uncertain future ahead. In the days that followed, the survivors returned to their camps, each tribe dealing with the aftermath of the battle in their own way. The Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho began to rebuild, their warriors tending to the wounded and honoring their fallen comrades. Brave Wolf, though victorious, could not escape the quiet grief that settled over him. He had fought with honor, but in the silence that followed, he understood the true cost of war, the loss of life, the destruction of families, and the deep scars left on the land. For the Crow, the battle had been a tragic setback, but it had not broken them. They knew their survival depended on their strength, unity, and determination. In the days to come, they would continue to fight for their land, for their people, and for their future. The conflict between the Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Crow was far from over. The plains would once again become the stage for a battle of survival, and the warriors would fight until their last breath to protect all they held dear. As weeks passed, the wind on the plains grew colder, signaling the changing seasons. The snow began to settle in the highlands, and the once vibrant grasslands that had borne witness to so much bloodshed were now blanketed in a peaceful stillness. Yet beneath this calm exterior, a storm was brewing. For the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, the victory over the Crow was just one chapter in an ongoing struggle to protect their lands and way of life. For the Crow, the defeat had only strengthened their resolve to reclaim what had been lost. In the months following the battle, Brave Wolf, along with a few surviving warriors, embarked on a journey back to their homeland. The weight of the battle was still fresh on his mind, the faces of the fallen flashing in his memory. Yet, there was also a quiet determination in his heart. The land that had once been theirs, sacred and untamed, was now under threat from all sides. The battle was not over. It was only just beginning. The Crow were not the only ones affected by the aftermath of the battle. Chief Blackhawk, having survived the conflict, spent the winter months rallying his people. He knew that, despite their losses, the spirit of the Crow was unbroken. The defeat had been a hard blow, but it had not shattered their will to survive. He called for a gathering of the remaining warriors to speak of the future and to forge a path forward. As the fire crackled in the center of the camp, Blackhawk stood tall before his people, his voice strong and steady. We have been tested by the fires of battle, and though the smoke has cleared, we still stand. We have not lost our land, and we have not lost our spirit. It is time for us to heal, to rebuild, and to come together as one. The enemy may have won a battle, but the war is far from over. The gathering was filled with murmurs of agreement, the warriors nodding in solemn understanding. They knew the task ahead of them would not be easy, but there was strength in unity. Blackhawk's words, though simple, carried with them the weight of generations. an unbroken legacy of resilience that had been passed down from ancestors who had faced greater challenges and triumphed. In that moment, the Crow found hope. The Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, too, began to reflect on the aftermath of the battle. While they had emerged victorious, the cost had been high. The bonds between the allied tribes were tested, and there were whispers of what might come next. The fragile peace they had fought for was a tenuous thing. And in the hearts of the warriors, the fire of conflict still burned. Brave Wolf spent many nights in contemplation, looking out over the snow-covered plains. His heart was heavy with the knowledge that, though they had won, there was no true victory in war. The land was scarred, the people wounded, and the future uncertain. He often found himself wrestling with the same question. What was the cost of survival? It was during these nights of reflection that Brave Wolf found a new sense of purpose. He realized that the only way forward for both his people and the Crow was not through more bloodshed, but through a deep and unyielding respect for the land, the spirits, and each other. Va had torn them apart, but perhaps there was a way to heal those wounds, to build something stronger from the ashes of their battles. In secret, Brave Wolf began to meet with representatives from the other tribes. These meetings were small and cautious, for there was still much mistrust between them. But in each gathering, a seed of understanding was planted. Though they were enemies, they were also brothers and sisters in the struggle to protect their lands, their way of life, and their very survival. There was no easy path, but there was a possibility for peace. A fragile possibility, but a possibility nonetheless. Chief Blackhawk, too, saw the value in these meetings. He knew that the Crow could not stand alone in the face of the ever-expanding threats to their way of life. The European settlers, the encroaching U.S. government, and the shifting tides of power on the plains had left no tribe untouched. If the Crow were to survive, they would need to seek alliances, not just with their own people, but with those who had once been their enemies. In the months to come, Blackhawk began to form bonds with the leaders of the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, recognizing that peace was not only possible, but necessary. As the winter melted into spring, a new energy filled the air. The warriors, weary from battle, returned to their villages. They rebuilt homes, tended to the sick, and celebrated the lives that had endured. The sound of drums once again filled the air, not the sound of war, but the sound of hope. The Crow, though scarred, were ready to rise again. The days of open warfare between the Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Crow may have been over for now, but the future was still uncertain. The leaders knew that while peace might have settled on the surface, the struggle to protect their people, their lands, and their way of life would never end. The battle for survival continued, not with weapons in hand, but with wisdom, unity, and the courage to change the path they had once been on. Brave Wolf, standing at the edge of the plains once more, knew that the land had not only borne the scars of war, but also the seeds of something greater. The dawn of a new day was rising, and though the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, it was a road they would walk together.